So Priya Parker does a lot of great work on like intentional gathering, building community, and how as a host you can facilitate conversations that do that. And the audience member who came up to me, she also reminded me of the quote that purpose is the best bouncer, which I really loved, of like, you kind of select, maybe who should be part of the podcast or who the audience is based on the purpose that you're trying to achieve. I took a quote from her for the beginning of that panel related to how hosts can create a structure that makes guests feel comfortable. And, in this case, guests might be podcast guests or listeners or viewers to the podcast who are opting to spend their valuable time with you. So you want to make sure that you're being conscious of the time that they're giving you. And then how, as a host, you can demonstrate, I think, curiosity and humility and making sure that you make them feel safe as part of the conversation and structure it in a thoughtful way.
Welcome to Continuing Studies, a podcast for higher education podcasters. I'm Neil McPhedran, founder of Podium Podcast Company and Higher Ed Pods.
And I'm Jennifer Lee, founder of JPod Creations. Podcasting is broadcasting.
So today we are here at Higher Ed PodCon, and we are sitting with Sophie White from EDUCAUSE. And we had sat in on an earlier session where she was on a panel chatting about hosting and the art of hosting.
One of my favorite topics, as
It is one of your favorite topics. So we're going to actually just sort of get into that, and we're going to cover off a bunch of the amazing things that she chatted about in the panel.
And can we just shout out to, obviously we have our producer as always, Kylie, but our producer right now for this beautiful studio, Josh. Sorry, Kylie, you're not being replaced, but we're happy you're here.
Yeah, this is such a fantastic studio here at Cuyahoga College, and it is absolutely incredible. And these bright lights, I'm just loving. And here we are on video.
I think we might have to move to studio format. Are you ready for that, Kylie?
And I was going to say, don't get used to it. The rest of our episodes, we're going back to non-video.
Fine. Okay, let's get the interview started.
Sophie, so great to have you here. Thanks for joining us on an episode of Continuing Studies.
Thanks for having me.
We're here at PodCon, live in this fantastic studio. This is fun on video. You normally don't record on video, though, correct?
We record on video, but usually virtually. So this whole setup, the bright lights and everything is exciting for me.
Okay, so your podcast is EDUCAUSE Shop Talk. So maybe just sort of tell us a little bit of what EDUCAUSE is, because I think it touches a lot of higher education institutions, and then what's your podcast about?
Yes, I'd be happy to. So I am one of the hosts and producers for EDUCAUSE Shop Talk. And EDUCAUSE is a nonprofit association for higher education technology and data professionals primarily. So our mission is really about using technology and data in service of the greater good for higher education. So we do a lot of work in terms of providing insights, research, professional development opportunities, advocacy for folks who are working in technology roles in higher ed. And that spans, even though it seems kind of niche, it spans quite a few different professions. So it's everything from chief information officers to cybersecurity and privacy folks at institutions who are protecting them, teaching and learning professionals who might work with faculty on how to use technology in the classroom. We do some work with librarians. So it's really a wide range. And EDUCAUSE Shop Talk is supposed to be a conversational podcast that brings members of our community, usually representing higher ed institutions, with our EDUCAUSE team to talk about big issues in higher ed and technology. It's intended to be a candid conversation. We do a lot of really great but more formal webinars, presentations at our annual conference, courses, things like that. And we wanted to bring a more conversational roundtable type of discussion to our members to have these conversations.
For knowing your audience, how do you know topics are going to resonate with them, and how do you choose the guests that are appropriate for these types of conversations?
Good question. So we've structured our editorial calendar for this podcast around our overall EDUCAUSE marketing and communication strategy. So when we started the podcast, it was tied to a specific product called the Showcase series, and that was about curated information related to important topics in higher ed and technology. So we looked at what our community told us through various signals they were interested in learning about, created this product on it, and then the podcast was a way to dive deeper. So we might have a showcase on collaborative cybersecurity, for example. We knew because our members had already told us that was an interesting topic for them. We have research reports, webinars, professional development courses about that. But we also said, let's have a podcast on this discussion so we can get into this more casual conversation about the topic they'd already identified. And then from there, in terms of guest selection, it really depends. We have some episodes that we center around research reports we do at EDUCAUSE. So in that case, we might take a panelist or an author who contributed to that report to get their perspective representing both a panelist and their institution. We also, every once in a while, we try to be somewhat open to not just feedback, but proposals or pitches for sessions because we want to reflect what our members need. So we have a few sessions where someone talked to us in the hallway at a conference and said, hey, I think that this would be a really great angle for your podcast. We socialize the idea within, our team and community. They tell us this is a good episode, and then we'll usually invite that person who suggested it to be a guest and ask if they want to bring anyone on with them. So it depends. One of the reasons we created this podcast, too, is that we just have a really fantastic and vocal group of members who are enthusiastic about the work we do. So we wanted to find a way to showcase them more, too.
I love that. Here at PodCon, I've sat in on a bunch of sessions, and one of the things that struck me is just how podcasting can be such an interesting mechanic to create these conversations, that all these other awesome things that you and your team are doing, but podcasting gives you a unique opportunity to have those conversations. The session I sat in was a panel where you were talking about hosting and the art of hosting. So I'd love to get into that a little bit, but you shared at the beginning a Priya Parker quote about gathering. And I think that sort of goes into the having different conversations thing. Maybe you can sort of unpack that a bit.
I'm so glad you brought that up too, because at the end of that panel, we had one of the audience members come up and said, oh, have you read the whole book, The Art of Gathering? And I was like, yes, I love that book. We actually had Priya Parker talk at our annual conference at EDUCAUSE a few years ago. So I have been a huge fangirl ever since. But so Priya Parker does a lot of great work on intentional gathering, building community, and how as a host you can facilitate conversations that do that. And the audience member who came up to me, she also reminded me of the quote that purpose is the best bouncer, is the quote from the book, which I really loved, of you kind of select, maybe who should be part of the podcast or who the audience is based on the purpose that you're trying to achieve. So yeah, I took being conscious of the time that they're giving you. And then how, as a host, you can demonstrate, I think, curiosity and humility, and making sure that you make them feel safe as part of the conversation and structure it in a thoughtful way.
I love that picture of purpose is the bouncer. I think that's great. And I think it works in a multitude of ways. I think too, sometimes when we're podcasting and we get some guests with bigger names or bigger followings or a little bit more prestige in the university world, I think sometimes we feel like we have to have them on, but we got to remember, is it the purpose of our podcast?
Yeah, I was at a session yesterday at this conference that was talking about, make sure that you're selecting based on the topic or the purpose and not just the guests, like you just said. So I think it's easy in higher ed. We do have a lot of very prestigious names who are around, and it can be easy to get caught up in that. But there are a lot of other people who maybe are more under the radar, but have some fantastic things to say too. So it's a balance.
Who is your most memorable guest?
Oh, a most memorable guest. I feel like for me, it might be Karen Costa. She's a faculty member who's doing a lot with sustainability in higher education. We had her on last year for a really great conversation on, especially in this age of AI and all of this conversation about data centers, water usage, things like that, how higher ed can lead the way in sustainability work. So I think that one, she she was really thoughtful about it and also referenced a bunch of interesting books that I then read afterwards. So that one to me, I think just personally stood out. We also did a really great podcast earlier this year in 2026 about the value of the liberal arts in the age of AI. And that one I really loved. We had several fantastic guests, but that's a subject I'm passionate about. So that one was fun for me.
So you're a co-host, and unfortunately we couldn't grab your co-host. She had to catch a plane, but we're co-hosts, and I think it creates a different, obviously, and it creates a different dynamic. How have you guys found your lanes? Just having sat in on your panel, your different personalities, which I think is great, and
Definitely.
we're very different personalities.
Yeah, I think complementary personalities helps a lot. My co-host, Janae Robert, she is a really fantastic researcher at EDUCAUSE. She comes from a research background. She writes many of our reports. Lately, they've been about AI in higher education, so she's been doing a lot of work on this, which is a very important topic. She has a lot of presentation opportunities herself related to it. So when we were starting this podcast, Kelly Horan, our fantastic producer, asked if I would serve as one of the co-hosts, partly based, I think, on my webinar moderation experience. I had some experience moderating these types of conversations, but not in the podcast format. And I come from like a liberal arts, humanities, and marketing background, so I don't have deep technology expertise, even though many of our members do. So I think that we kind of took stock of my personality and knowledge base, and I think I'm bringing kind of this curiosity and like layperson's perspective to the conversation. And then Janae really brings that deeper, like technical and research-based expertise. So I think that we have figured out how to feed off of each other in that way, and that I can kind of take the conversation up a level sometimes to say, if someone doesn't know this really deep expertise on the latest AI topics, for example, like how do we define this for them? Whereas Janae can dive into, this is the significance of the research, this is what it means for higher education. Over time, we've developed a good cadence just working together. Our podcast is primarily recorded virtually on Riverside. But if Janae's thinking about something, she kind of has this certain facial expression that I can pick up on. And I might wait to say something because I can tell she has a brilliant insight coming out, and vice versa.
Co-hosting is probably one of the hardest things, and everyone wants to do it. And I know this because I come from a background in radio. And
you've never mentioned that before on this podcast.
You're just jealous because of a radio background. Anyways, see, we're good co-hosts. But with co-hosting is sometimes the people get paired together are amazing. Sometimes they're awful together. And I think it's also who is driving the proverbial car of the interview. So when you guys do it, who's driving your car?
I do more of the background work, and I introduce the episode.
So you're the passenger.
I would say, no, I was going to say I think I'm the driver in terms of I keep it moving along and the structure going, but I think Janae like kind of fills in those gaps and keeps maybe some of the thoughtful conversations going in a different way.
And
so
that's important because you both can't drive.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I've listened to podcasts where people are trying to drive at the same time and you're like, oh, they're competing with each other.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think we have a good cadence for that. I also mentioned in our session that Kelly, our producer, she's behind the scenes and she plays a really important role in the conversation too. And
she's in the backseat.
She's in the backseat, but she slacks us sometimes and says like, hey, we've been talking about this thing for too long. Can you move this conversation? And I think like Janae and I really try to be, mindful. We're practicing active listening. We're trying to stay in the conversation. But sometimes when you're so deep in it, having that person who's on the outside but still watching and can give you the
helpful
nudge in the right direction is a really good thing.
Jen, I feel like you and I are like one of those student driver cars. You're driving, but I'm in the other side trying to steer us just in case something happens. I've got the brake. I've got the brake.
But do you not trust me? Because we got to rethink this co-host situation. You need trust to have a co-host.
Yep.
Apparently Neil doesn't trust me. It's fine.
I trust you.
One thing I'd love to add that I think was important for our panel, I think about the trust actually co-hosts, is that Janae and I have a lot of good communication, especially the day of an episode of like, we're all humans. So sometimes you have an off day and there have been times that, I'm like, I did not sleep last night. Like my cat was sick. whatever is going on, or she might come back to me and she has some personal thing going on, and we might send each other a message and say, like, I'm not 100% today. Can you drive the conversation more? So we do kind of share that responsibility in some cases, which I think has helped with our success of it.
Yeah, sometimes you need a pit stop. It's okay.
Yes, to keep the metaphor going.
So while your interview is going on, you said you've got the eye contact because you're on Riverside, but do you have using any other tools, Slack or anything like that you're also talking on just in case?
Yeah, we'll have Slack on in the background. I think virtually that works pretty well. For in-person conversations,
it doesn't
that's
work
tricky.
right now, right?
Exactly. Especially that you both are looking at me and you're looking at each other. Yeah.
Well, because I'll turn off my mic if I don't. But like we've been doing this, what, 3 years?
Yeah.
This sounds weird. I can feel you, like your presence. I kind of know though, like where he's going, even though I've got my back turned to him. But we're usually on a virtual as well, even though we don't live very far from each other. But we do virtual podcasts because it just suits our lifestyle. But we have a Google Doc, and our producer Kylie, Neil, and I will be like writing in the doc. Neil does hate it when I veer off the doc because sometimes I'll just put the doc down and start talking.
I'm like what Janae said today. She said that she likes to sort of keep going on questions, and if you kind of get off, she mentioned that kind of gets her a little bit nervous. That's me. I'm ready for my next question.
Right.
And if Jen's not asking the next question, I'm like, Jen, what are you doing? Inherently, it's a good question that she asks, but I find that difficult.
Yeah, it's stressful when you're out of that driver's seat.
But you're not supposed to follow the map to a T.
No, I know. That's what I've learned from you over the years.
Yeah, like we still get to our destination, don't we?
Yep.
Yeah. See, I can't see you, but I'm like, I can feel you. I can feel you hesitating. It's like.
Well, I wasn't sure if you were asking me. One of the other things you were chatting about was, and also one of the keynotes that we had was excellent, was sort of the rigor versus the fun. I thought that was interesting because you could just tell on the panel that the two of you have good rapport. You joked with each other, so I would imagine that comes out in the show. So there's obviously some rigor involved, but you're having fun together.
Yes, I agree. I also loved that keynote. Yeah, Greg Jackson, the historian, talked. I was joking. I love to read, and after that session, I was like, every time I see a speaker, I always have to buy their book, and my suitcase is already too full, and now I have a new book because that one was great. But no, I think that's important, and especially in higher ed, I feel like we can get really caught up in the rigor. He was mentioning, we're so obsessed with peer review, which is a great thing in terms of credibility and all of that, but to really translate into an accessible way the value of higher ed, I think we need to also be able to have some fun and add entertainment to it. So, yeah, I think it's a balance, and I think we try to model adding some joking to the conversation so that people know, that is acceptable. We also prep our guests ahead of time about the tone of the podcast. So we'll send out a prep document that says, here's a clip to get a sense of the tone. It's intended to be casual, so feel free to go on tangents, tell stories, whatever it is. So, yeah, I think we try to model it and prepare our guests that way. And then it's always a balance. I mean, people are probably there to learn something. So you have to be careful of, we don't want it to only be a joke because we kind of understand our space. Like, we're not a comedy podcast. If someone's on, one of these major podcasting platforms, there are funnier people out there than us. We are not the funniest people on YouTube. But we do think that, it does make people stay engaged and interested in this topic so that they will learn something that we hopefully can provide them that will stick with them from the conversation.
Well, it's no different than going to school and having a really boring teacher.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like today too, there are so many other ways that people can spend their time online. You could be listening to music, there are audiobooks, there are other podcasts. So I think we do need to capture people's attention in some way to make sure that they stay.
Well, it's interesting you said that because I watched Stephen Goldstein's talk yesterday, and he was talking about the fact that if you have mediocre content, you got to remember everybody has thousands of choices. Why do people want to listen?
Exactly.
Multiple guests. You mentioned as well when we were in your panel that your show often has multiple guests. How do you guys manage multiple guests if you're two hosts and then you got multiple guests? It's a lot of people. Do you have any tricks, tips? What do you guys do to sort of manage that?
Good question. I think we definitely, again, set the tone at the beginning that it's supposed to be a roundtable type of discussion. So we actually encourage our guests to ask each other questions if they have any, which I think contributes to making it an organic conversation. You know, we tell them we don't have to drive the conversation always as the host. We want to make sure that you are able to dive into these conversations as the experts. Usually they're the subject matter experts in something that we bring on that you think is interesting or relevant. So I think we empower them in that way. And I think mentally I'm trying to keep a general clock of who is getting an equal amount of speaking time. Sometimes we have run into situations where we have 2 or 3 guests and one person is dominating the conversation. So I think when you realize that might be where you have to take a more proactive role as the host and say, I learned some great tips, I think, from Rudy on our panel today, Rudy Sallow, who was on the panel. And he said, you know, maybe you say, oh, this made me think of another thing. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, he was talking about how he interrupts. If
exactly.
Things are, yeah.
So a polite way to interrupt, not just stop talking. Yeah.
But you're also being respectful to everybody, because sometimes the panels and roundtables, they don't always work because it just becomes interviewer person asking question, one person speaking. Then the person at the end might be shy and then they don't want to jump in. And then how do you deal with a shy person if you're like, oh, they're not contributing?
I think usually that has to be a more pointed question I've found of, you know, making sure that you're kind of taking the proverbial mic from the person who might be overwhelming the conversation and giving it to the shyer person. So there's a reason that everyone is on the podcast that we invited. So you know, it might be what do you think about this topic? You know, I know you've worked on this specific element of research. Tell us more. So maybe something that helps direct the specific question you want them to answer. I think we ran into the most guests we've had on an episode. We did one last year with folks from the California state system and OpenAI. So that was, you know, a really hot topic for a bit. California state was the first system to do a system-wide ChatGPT EDU implementation. We said, oh, this was a really interesting case study for other institutions about how you can do something like this. And as we were working with them, it's such a collaborative effort that they were pretty insistent. You know, we want to make sure that we have our system CIO on. We want a CIO from a specific institution using this. We want someone who is involved in the change management element of working with faculty. And to make sure we did the conversation justice, we needed OpenAI there too to share their perspective since it was a partnership. So I think we had 5 or 6 guests and 2 hosts on that one.
Wow.
And it was interesting. We kind of were like, we're going to hope for the best and see how this goes. But we did a prep call beforehand, and then that group was used to presenting on this topic because it was so popular.
And they were used to working together,
exactly.
talking together? Okay,
so they knew how to talk about it themselves.
Yeah.
In that one, both of us, Janae and I, really took a step back as the host. I introduced the session. I told them what we were talking about, and then it was kind of tell us about this, and they really kept it going themselves. So I think that was an instance where you might just take a step back and you have some episodes where you don't say a lot as the host, and that's really making sure you're creating the best experience for the guests and listeners too.
You don't have to throw anyone under the bus, but I want to know, because you've probably had one. Is there a multi-panel that you were like, oh, this is going to be really great, and then it just did not work out because other people were talking over top of each other, or people were not giving anything to work with, not contributing? Can you tell us a little bit about that and how you overcome it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we had an early episode in our podcast where I think actually Janae caught this ahead of time, and I wish maybe we'd listened to her more, but we had someone who was a supervisor and then one of their staff members on, and I think it created kind of an interesting power dynamic where the manager was really taking over the mic, and then the person being managed didn't really feel comfortable to interrupt or take over in that case. So that was an interesting challenge as a host that I think we really had to encourage the other person to make sure that she was able to step up and share her expertise, but it was kind of an uneven sharing of the conversation. So
people don't ever talk about that. It can happen in a small interview like this as well, where sometimes the guest clams up and doesn't say anything, And it is very difficult. What are some tips do you think that would make you a better interviewer in that situation?
Yeah, I feel like there are a few. On our panel just now, Kate Young from Purdue talked about how you might be in a situation like this, and if you have a great production team, you might be able to edit that out in post-production. So that's an option. I think as a nervous guest, I feel like usually I find that personal connections help them warm up in some way. So I think some of that is at the beginning of the call, setting the tone. So I like to make sure that, I might connect with someone on LinkedIn ahead of time and see if they have any interesting updates that we can chat about. So your kid just graduated from high school, like let's talk about what that means. Usually that's something that if they're posting on LinkedIn about it, they're really enthusiastic about. That creates a more conversational feel. We're virtual, so often people have a dog running through or a piece of art or something that you can connect on. So I think that can help people warm up. If other than personal conversations, I think for me, just adding like humor into the conversation just loosens people up in general. So I might tell a story that maybe doesn't reflect well on me. I did something that was like silly or not so thought out, and I'll make fun of myself in that instance. And then I think they feel more comfortable to maybe make a mistake, and they kind of realize, oh, we're all human. We're not perfect. It's okay if I don't say this in exactly the way I wanted to. So I try to model that as a host to build comfort.
We work with Matt Abrahams on Think Fast, Talk Smart, and he teaches communications at Stanford, and he coaches like C-suite people. One of the things that amazes me is he always says at the beginning of his interviews, if you make a mistake, don't worry, you can stop, you can start. And he goes, I'll make more mistakes than you. And I think that's really interesting because he is supposed to be the uber expert. And you can see the guest almost every time going like, oh, wow, you're going to make the mistakes. And it puts them at ease.
I love that.
Helps too. Someone on the panel, they also brought up, once you warm up, circling back to the first question. That was a good idea too. I
definitely wrote that down.
Yeah, like she'll circle back after the fact once everyone's warmed up and you're feeling good. And if that one or the first couple of questions was really good, come back to them. You can edit them back in, obviously, right? In post. So I thought that was a good. I
thought so too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like I said something like this, but we're talking so much about AI at work, and then I do work in content marketing. I feel like we're all so exhausted by this, like, everything has to be perfect. Everything's perfectly crafted in this age of AI. And I think people really love seeing, a mistake that shows you're a real human that is fallible. And I think they connect with you more than us always having this perfectly polished image.
That's kind of what Rudy said yesterday on his panel that he did, and even with Neil and I when we chatted with him, was the fact that sometimes people think he's a scary law professor. But as soon as he does the podcast and is more human and isn't really polished, he said the students have come up to him and be like, oh, okay, like, and connect and chat with him more. And he says it makes it better.
With his students, actually, to see him do that too. So, yeah, this has been great. This has been an awesome conversation. Really enjoyed it. Well, one thing I sort of want to end with, the rest of your job, you're the content marketing and program manager, and there's a number of podcasts with EDUCAUSE, right? Maybe you can sort of explain to us a little bit about how podcasting fits into that larger mix of engagement with with all your organizations.
Definitely. Yeah. So the Shop Talk podcast I support, I mentioned it. It originally started as part of this other product, the Showcase series. And when it snowballed, we then started expanding it to dive into other EDUCAUSE research reports primarily. We do a lot of really great research in interesting things. So we have a Horizon report, for example, is one of my favorite topics to talk about. It looks at potential futures for higher education and technology, and then it looks at things like environmental, social, political signals that we can look at in higher ed. So we saw the podcast as another entry point to something like that, where someone could read this report that is in a written format if that's how they like to access information. We know that some people do. We also know that some people would rather listen to a podcast conversation where we talk about maybe the themes and how they apply in a specific sense. So it's not a substitute for that report by any means, but it is a way to add context to it. So we looked at it as kind of a deliverable that accentuates those products. And then we do have other podcasts at EDUCAUSE, like you mentioned. Those serve different goals. So Again, ours is candid conversations about different topics in higher ed. We have one that supports our more emerging professionals in the space. So that one's a little bit more professional development focused. We have a young professionals advisory committee at EDUCAUSE who was really the mastermind behind that. They brought that podcast to us and said, we want a young professionals podcast.
That's great.
Our EDUCAUSE review editorial team supported them. So that's a collaborative effort. We have an integrative CIO podcast, which is really looking from the leadership lens at how technology leaders can thoughtfully interact in the space. So they all have different purposes and some
audience
overlap
too, I guess, too. Right?
Yeah.
It's interesting. I like that.
Some overlap in audiences, but some are a little more segmented. So we'll see.
Great.
And I don't know where we'll go next. We were just talking about, I think there are some more emerging technology topics that it could make sense to have a podcast or video series or something like that about. So we will see.
Good.
There you go. Well,
That's great.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us here today, Sophie.
Thank
I've
you
really
for having
enjoyed this
me.
conversation and for sharing what you shared in that room on the panel. We can take it to a larger group of listeners here now, or viewers.
and also check out all the EDUCAUSE podcasts.
Yeah.
Yes,
We'll drop a link to
educause.edu.
all
Something
that
for
in our-
everyone.
Yeah. We'll drop a link in our show notes. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Here we are, Jen, back from PodCon, a couple days later, first week back, recording in our home studios. So here we are. That's why we look different from the rest if you were watching on video. I had a great time at PodCon, and I hope you really enjoyed this episode with Sophie White. It was awesome. We had a really good time in that studio.
I miss it. I feel like we don't get the superstar treatment here on Zoom. And I don't know if we're going to continue to do video after our first few video ones, but I'm excited for us to finally, after so many years of going, will we do video, will we not? Here we are. You can listen to us.
Well,
on
we're
both.
not on Zoom. We're on Rooms. Descriptive.
Oh, sorry, rooms, not Zooms.
Yeah. Well, we have another episode that's going to be following with Rudy Sallow that we interviewed in studio at PodCon. And we've got a whole bunch of other PodCon folks lined up that you and I met. So if you were there and you're listening to this, and we hadn't talked to you already, do reach out because we'd love to have you on Continuing Studies.
Yes, please. Thank you for tuning into the Continuing Studies podcast, a podcast for higher education podcasters. We hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. If you enjoyed the show, we encourage you to follow and subscribe to our podcast on your preferred platform so you'll never miss an episode. But if you found this episode particularly valuable, please consider sharing it with your friends and colleagues who also might be interested in higher education podcasts. We also invite you to join your peers on higheredpods.com, where you can connect with other podcasters in higher education and learn from others in the field. Thank you for being part of our community. We look forward to continuing to bring you valuable insights and conversations around higher education podcasts. See you in the next episode.